G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and today we're going to be looking at the Halot Mage Pro. So this is a 3D printer review, and this is for a resin 3D printer. Now, I've had a partnership with Creality for a few years now, so full disclaimer up front, this was sent to me as a review copy. This was not paid for out of my own pocket. What was paid for out of my own pocket were many of the resins and materials used during this review. And as always, you're going to get a fair and honest review from me because I pride myself on that here at the channel. So, all that said, what do I think of the printer? Well, firstly, obviously, it was well packaged. It came to me in decent boxing with very thick foam that was packaging it all, as well as shrink-wrapped bags around everything, or wrapped bags around everything. And as you can see, it's just full of foam. So nothing was moving, nothing was rattling around inside of them. And actually pulling it out of the box and setting them up was quite easy. Gone are the days where you really had to struggle when putting 3D printers together, when all the parts came separate in a box. Now everything's pre-assembled, pre-leveled, pre-zeroed, and really all you have to do is just remove the packaging foam from in there. So, one of the features that you'll notice straight away on this is the top actually isn't separate. It is a hinged top piece which opens up. We have a spare 3D print release film in there as well. Interesting fact, it's a 3-layered release film this time out, and they say that it allows for a faster and smoother release, which I do believe, having used it. We also get the standard 3D printing tools that you would expect, a couple of filters, a couple of sets of gloves, a scraper, your power cable, a couple of Allen keys for doing up the bolts around the machine, but honestly you won't have to use too much of it, especially during assembly, because as I said, it's all pre-assembled. You also see there's a white tube in there. There's actually a extension tube that goes into the back of the printer, and I'll point that out to you later. Now you can also see here that the head of the printer, which I just pointed to, is actually got a piece of foam sandwiching it, which is preventing the screen from being damaged during transit. So in order to get that out, we'll have to actually move the printer. The open height of this unit is 720 millimeters, as you can see. I thought I'd quickly grab a tape measure that was nearby and just measure that since it was on the shelf and I had to make sure I had enough room for it. So when we open up the printer here, what you'll see inside is that it's a pretty nicely put together unit. Machined, there's a little small amount of grease around the edges, which I was feeling for then, just lubrication grease. At the back of the unit here is a set of controls for the pump and the filter cartridge. There is also a hose in the back. This hose is designed to feed resin into and out of the machine and is designed to be plugged straight into a bottle. The port that I'm pointing to now is of course the filter port, where the hose can go into to extend the filter and plumb it out of the room if you like. So we're going to plug in the power here, switch on the unit, spin it around, and we'll start it up for the first time. This is going to be exciting. Also a dongle in the back for connecting to your computer. So when you start it up, option of Wi-Fi, I don't have Wi-Fi in the building that it's in at the moment, so I didn't go through that step. Went into the print functions. There were no saved programs in the print functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a USB and we're going to plug a USB into the printer momentarily, and then we're going to see what that USB has on it, because sometimes these ship with programs. So in it goes. Is the machine fast? Does the computer pick up fast? Yes, it does. So the actual hardware itself is quite quick. It's quicker than some of my older printers, which is nice to know. And we have 2 programs in there. So we'll tap on one of these programs now. As you can see, imported very, very quickly across, and there's 3 options in there now. I can remove the USB and it's saved the option that I imported across. This is very handy when you're doing auto slicing because you can put a model in, start the process up of printing that model, and then move on to the next one. Now I raised up the printer slightly in order to remove the build plate. The build plate now has a screw on the front that's connected to a stainless steel camping mechanism at the back. It's actually quite a nice design, but I was surprised to see that it was actually just a pressed and folded piece of metal that did it, which is perfectly acceptable manufacturing thing. It was just, I would have thought it would have been some precast component. So we remove now that piece of foam from in there, and we get a bit of a look at this. So at the rear left, where my left hand is, just past the knob, you'll see that there is the little spout for filling and emptying the vat. And that spout is hinged, and we'll come back to this later, but that hinging spout is going to be one of my big gripes with this machine, we'll call it. So the actual build plate itself, interesting thing here is of course that triple layer FEP. It has a sort of frosted finish, and as you look on the underside here, we hit a major flaw. Can you see any feet? No, there are no feet underneath this build plate, or underneath the resin vat, I apologise. Because there are no feet underneath this resin vat, if you need to put the vat down, remove it from the machine for some reason, there is a chance you can damage or contaminate the FEP on the underside. There should be feet moulded into this in some way, added to it, in order to lift it up off the workbench, so when you put it down, you're not scraping that plastic on anything. Instead, when I put it aside, I've got to put it aside on top of an object in order to not damage it. Also, I noticed that a very small thing, but on the handle here, you'll see there's a small little tab of aluminium. That little tab is probably from when they cast it, and as you can see, if I put a piece of thick paper towel over it, which is relatively sturdy material, tore a big chunk out, and that will slice your fingers. So, I had to clean that off as well. Not a major thing, but these are the sort of things I do notice, little residuals from the manufacturing process. I still think the feet issue on the vat is quite a major one, and it's something that they have not had on previous machines. For example, on the Halot 1 Plus, that had feet and didn't have the issue. On the actual build plate itself, you can see they've actually laser etched a grid pattern into here. Now, on the first couple of prints, that was problematic, and not in a bad way, but it made removing the miniatures very difficult. There were often all these little squares of resin left on the build plate on top of each of those laser etched squares, because it gripped so well to them it broke away from the rest of it, and I had to spend quite a lot of time removing all the little pieces of resin, which was annoying, we'll say. But I guess if the worst thing that's happening is you're getting really good bed adhesion, that's not a bad thing at all. Now this is not sped up, that is real-time movement speed on this machine. As you can see, it is blindingly fast. They're saying 170 millimeters an hour of print speed as well with this machine. I have actually got it over that, just by measuring it. But there are compromises to be made with that kind of build speed. The biggest one is probably materials. So you're trying to get a material that is thin enough, as in the viscosity of the material, that when raised and lowered, it can move in to fill the void left by your machine moving out of the way. So viscosity is really important here in order to get that. The resin that they supplied it with, so they supplied a single tub of this Creality resin. Now I've tried 3 other resins in this printer. I tried one from Seriotech, I tried one from... I have to try and remember which one I tried. I'll come back to it and I'll put a note here if I remember. I also tried some Elegoo resin and a couple of others along the way that I have been testing with in the background, but only in smaller quantities. So I've put probably about 2.5 litres of my own stuff through this really at this point, on top of the original litre that came from Creality. So shook up the resin obviously, get it all prepped. I know it was mixed already, but I still go through the process of shaking the bottle up. It hasn't been sitting there for a long time, it has been transported around, so it was quite well mixed. If you leave resins for a while, they tend to separate out the different constituent chemicals within there, and that can be a bit of a problem. As you can see how easily it's running off the side, this is quite a low viscosity, so very thin resin. That means that it is able to get in there and fill a lot of the space that is made when the print head moves the printed object out of the way. So I plug the hose into the back right now because I want to test out the filling and emptying function. So we hit the fill, give it a moment to actually siphon some material up the tube to the pump. It starts to come in and then it stops. Right. Well, this is auto fill, auto empty. Why is it stopping? So I lifted up the nozzle, and what you can see here is when you lift the nozzle out of the way, because it's designed to fold out of the way to release the vat, because it overhangs the vat. Well, resin leaks down from the nozzle, and it's just the perfect angle that any droplets of resin on it run down, and it's really hard to get into. You can see how wet with resin this piece of paper towel is, and I don't have the world's biggest hands, but I had a lot of difficulty getting in here trying to clean this out, because if you don't clean it out, that resin's going to drop down. It's going to drop onto the screen of the printer, which we really don't want. So, okay, I'll move the vat out of the way. Well, now the vat can't be put down, just straight on a bench or anything, because there's no feet on it. And now I have to come back to the printer and continue the cleaning process. And as you can see, there's a little droplet of resin built up at the tip of the nozzle, and that's what basically ran down the nozzle, down the angle, and pulled, and then because there's another angle there, it ran off and was dropping onto the screen of the printer. Was not impressed by that feature. That design needs to be modified somehow, maybe a bit more room, something. So, I figured this probably works like a fuel pump in that there is... it senses basically back pressure on the resin, and therefore that's the point when it will stop filling up. So, in order to test this theory out, I simply placed the vat on a slight angle, and by doing so, allowed the nozzle to not be dipping into the resin. And it just kept filling and filling, but as soon as you push it in, it cuts the flow. So really, all this is going to do during running of parts is going to refill the vat, at least on my particular printer here. It's going to refill it with just enough resin to build that base layer of printing that you're doing. It is not going to be putting enough resin into the machine to constantly have it at a full 1 litre fill height. That's just not going to happen. So now I decide I'm going to fill this by hand, and as you can see, I'm having some difficulty here because I've got to hold that hose that came on the back of it. Well, there is nothing actually on the back of this printer to hold the hose, no clips or retention devices. Now, I know this has been remedied because I spoke with people at Creality since I filmed this part of the review. But for my particular uses, well, that hose just dangling in the back sucks. There's nowhere to put it down if I need to remove the bottle, and the bottle itself is just sitting there on the bench.
A few moments later.
Well, the last thing I wanted for the bottle to do is to be knocked and tipped over and spill resin everywhere, so I decided that it was time to pull my finger out, and I created a little bit of a device here, which I decided to print on one of my other printers. This is why filament printers come in very handy. You can build large objects very quickly, and this was just a couple of hours. Halot Mage Pro, and the idea of this here is a little port that I can stick the nozzle into when I'm not using it, and a little U-shaped retention clip goes around the base of the foot, and then the resin can sit inside it. Ta-da! Done. Problem solved, and I made this a free STL, which I've given over to Creality. And yeah, so anyway, while that was printing out, I decided to do some slicing, try out a couple of different parts. So first one I was going to try was an egg from the movie Alien with a face hugger coming out of the egg. Really nice STL that I found. Got the USB together, sliced pretty quickly, pretty easily. Set it to the ultra fast Dynax mode because, well, I wanted to test out how fast this thing could go. And I'll upload it quickly and all that sort of thing. That was all fine. But we did run into a small issue during the print, as you'll see momentarily. So first thing I do, as always with these reviews, uploaded the file, make sure that the file transferred across to the device, and then remove the USB. If the feature is working correctly, then it wouldn't matter that I've removed the USB, and sure enough it didn't. And as you can see, this thing is coming in very, very quickly. Now this might be the upper limit on the speed with which one can come in with a build plate without the build plate having some sort of holes or resin diversion channels in it, because it really pushes the resin out of the way at that speed, to the point where you're almost waiting for it to splash up onto the machine. So we've probably hit the practical limit of this type of build plate. As you can see, during a print, it goes very, very quickly. All the settings are in here. Interesting thing that they've added is if you do change any of these settings, it actually brings you up a warning to say you are changing the settings. Are you sure you want to do this? Which is neat. You can't accidentally change the settings. You would have to be going out of your way to do so. Now, with these devices here, it's all working as intended, and then this happened. So this was not very long into the print actually, I think about an hour, if that, and I wasn't even running at the fastest Dynax speed yet. So what went wrong? Simply it was not enough support. As you can see here, there was a reasonable amount of support on the build plate, but never enough for this amount of surface area, even with a hollowed model, and it was hollowed. But it doesn't look hollow because of the grid pattern that it's been filled with inside. The actual texture on the model is fantastic. It looks very organic, very, very alien. So that was all great. There was a fatigue crack, however, that had occurred up the side of it. So interesting to note. So then I said, you know what, stuff this. Let's go for all or nothing. So I picked one of my designs of vehicle that I sell on my Cults 3D. And that is this here. Now you can see layer lines. There are small imperfections on the vehicle. Sure. But this is 2 hours and 38 minutes of printing. As you see, there's quite a bit of scraping and cleaning to be had with this first print. Just because you can see all the little squares there that have been ripped out of the resin in the background. I kept that in there just so you can see a bit of the effort that's going into just breaking this off. Like, I'm getting in the way of a camera and everything. And, some of you might say, oh, that's sort of very unprofessional. But at the end of the day, it's just demonstrating the amount of effort that I was putting into this. The grip adhesion was so great. Look at how much resin was torn out of the underside of the supports. And it actually left it on the build plate. So, fascinating just the amount of sheer grip that this had. And build plate adhesion is a huge deal. So, over to the UW02, which is the wash and cure that was also supplied with this machine. In went the models. I've since topped it up to a full 9.4 litres. So all the parts went into here. We are bathing these in order to obviously remove any leftover resin or such, but the machine did a relatively good job of rinsing a lot of the resin off of the parts anyway during the build process. I think some of that high speed actually shakes a bit more resin free, which is just interesting to note. The cleanup has not been as great as on earlier printers. Set it to a 5-minute wash cycle, and as you can see, the parts are physically shaking around in the bottom there because there's actually quite a lot of flow going on inside this, which is great to see because I have used several different wash and cures. I think I've mostly been using any cubic ones in the past, and getting to this stage was great. Now you can see that the quality on these printed parts, these still have a little bit of alcohol on them, so you'll see some little wet patches. But the quality is just, it's tabletop. It is fantastic quality straight away that you're seeing here. There is small defects or issues with some of these parts, but those small defects and issues were not the fault of the printer. During my testing, really, honestly, these defects were because of how I supported the miniature. I didn't account for just how much force during the high-speed operation this printer was going to actually exert on the parts. And removing large areas from the build plate, even if I've hollowed them, is a lot of pressure to put onto the machine. And because of this, it caused some distortion in areas because the supports were barely keeping up with what was being asked of them. They're being stretched elastically as well as being compressed constantly. And there is a lot for the poor machine to put up with. So I do really feel for them in that regard, these poor printers. But overall, all of these parts, the magnet holes, everything came out great. In fact, the magnet holes were designed at 5.2mm, and I had 5mm magnets to go into them. The magnets were loose because the printer was so accurate during those prints, even at 0.05mm layer height. Yes, this is 5 times worse detail than this printer is capable of. That was one of the compromises I made to print this in 2 hours and 38 minutes. This is a full Lehman Russ with multiple weapon options I'll add. One of the compromises is, of course, that you normally would lose accuracy. So, turned on the printer, bumped into the camera, let it all go, and yeah, it's fantastic. Also printed out this Zoanthrope looking Doom of Malantai type creature. This one here was about an hour 17. So again, just dialing up that speed. How fast can we go? How fast can we go? and that's with a 0.05mm layer height as well. And then this was one of the later versions of the tank, just working on those improved supports. And as you can see, a lot of those little distortions and issues, they're just gone. Just by changing the supporting, we've fixed them entirely. So, wash and cure them, let them dry off. I had a bit of an assembly line going because, well, the question was, how much can you produce with a printer like this? And it turns out, if you're producing a tank every 2 hours and 38 minutes, if you want to push it at high speed, you can produce 6 Lehman Russes a day comfortably in your waking hours. And yeah, the results were fantastic, as I've shown off on the channel itself. So with all that in mind now, what I want to talk about here is I want to talk about some of the things that are coming out in the printing market, because there's a lot of competition when it comes to 3D printing, right? All these different companies have their own different printers coming out, and they're all offering roughly the same things. So what sets this printer apart from the competition? Well, obviously high-speed printing, that's the big one. And, you know, the build quality, you've seen it, was fantastic. It had great bed adhesion. The printer did everything I asked it to all the way. So all of that was good. But there are companies like Anycubic, who I've used many of their products as well in the past. Anycubic is doing things like bringing out a 12K 10-inch printer. This is a 8K 10-inch, I think 10.1-inch screen, in fact. And people will naturally say, well, oh, wow, 12K, you know, what great resolution. Here's the thing, though. What I'm seeing, okay, and doing the maths on is I can't see any bonus to having 12Ks of resolution at 10.1 inches. You can't see with the human eye that level of detail. So it's just not a major concern for me as a person who is purchasing these 3D printers. So what I did was I canvassed a few other people. What do you think about this situation? You know, the move towards 12K printing on 10-inch screens. What about larger screens, larger models of printer? And it's really interesting to hear the feedback from the community. You know, I'm in a lot of 3D printing groups. I know a lot of other creators. And there is actually a list of features that we've basically compiled, or that I've compiled, based on the feedback of these people. First, of course, is must-haves. So this will be a 10-inch screen. 8K res, fantastic. This machine has both those things. Resin that's plugged into the machine with no need to handle it. Well, this is part of the way there. You can just put the bottle at the back of the machine, but really when you fill this machine up between large prints, you're probably going to unscrew the bottle and have to pour it in, let's be honest. We need a way of draining those materials out, which is great, that's fine. That does work with this machine, and it doesn't need me to get involved in that process beyond hitting the drain printer button. Okay, cool. Cleaning agents. Well, if a printer can get to the point where the cleaning agents are plugged into the machine and it cleans the miniature for you inside the printer, that is the day that conventional molding is going to go away. So that's a must-have requirement down the line. And a build plate that self-cleans is key to that. The cleaning agent should also be drained and filtered off into a cartridge so that the person who is doing the cleaning and running the printer doesn't have to touch the stuff ever. So a fully self-contained process. And the printer requires a filter unit. Something that I didn't talk about a lot in this review was, of course, the filter unit. It worked fantastically. The smell of the printer was not noticeable at all, and this was in a confined room. Even with a fan nearby that would have been blowing any fragrance, as it were, around the room, didn't notice it, wasn't an issue for me at all. So, okay, that's great. Filters are working fantastically in these units, and as long as they are easy to change out and of at least this quality going forward, I think it'll be fantastic, especially in apartment buildings. Now, there's also a set of what I would call desirable features on a printer. So these are not a must-have for the industry. Auto self-level. Well, I know that Anycubic is doing that on their newest model. So 12K doesn't interest me, but the auto self-level kind of does. But, well, leveling a printer isn't hard. And once you've owned a few printers, I've owned probably 16, 17 printers now. you get very good at leveling them and very quickly. So it's not the end of the world for me, but it's nice to know it's there so that if something does go wrong and the level gets thrown out, I'm not going to waste a print doing it or cause damage to the printer. Faster printing. Yes, it's desirable to print things very, very quickly, and this machine is phenomenal at printing quickly. Like a Lehman Russ in 2 hours and 38 minutes is astonishing. I think I pushed it all the way up to 2 hours and 17 minutes at the fastest point just by changing 1 or 2 settings. But that is really a quality of life improvement as opposed to something that is going to make this a more mainstream process. So quality prints that are self-cleaning and such with minimal input from the operator is inevitably going to be more desirable than printing faster. But because we haven't reached that stage yet, I'll take printing faster, and this machine does it so well. Longer screen life. Obviously, we want to get as much life out of these printers as we can, and you know, if you go back to, like, I had an original Anycubic Photon. You go back to those days, and the original Anycubic Photon, that screen burned out, you know, pretty quickly. Then we went from RGB to monochrome displays, and then so things like DLP that have come along. But yeah, higher screen life would be appreciated on these printers, and some of them have gotten pretty high. But if you're using these things all the time, you don't want to have to go in there and perform mechanical repairs of the screen. We also want to see better auto-supporting software. So the software should be getting intuitive enough now that it knows what is not enough for something. We're not quite there yet though. Like the auto add of supports in these printing slicing software is pretty good, and it gets it right probably 90% of the time. But the 10% of the time it doesn't is just frustrating, because it'll get, you know, something like these Lehman Russes, you'll get almost the whole tank looking perfect, and there'll be one part that's not. Now you got to go and reprint, basically reprint that part. Very frustrating thing. So the software in the background that is helping with the slicing should be better at picking up. That's got a lot of surface area. The surface area to support ratio in that part of the miniature is too high. We need to add more supports here. I would like to see that incorporated more. And lastly, cloud connectivity and real-time monitoring. Yes, it is really good to have these features in there, and this printer does. In fact, if you hook a webcam up to the USB supply with this and you have it hooked up to Wi-Fi, yes, you can actually watch your prints as they're going through the webcam, and you can have a time lapse or whatever it might be going. I didn't elect to go through that process this time out. I've done it on previous models of printer. It's a luxury, and really for those of us who are in the war games area, because really that's what we do different to other 3D printing channels. When you are producing miniatures for tabletop wargaming, you're probably not going to be taking time-lapse of them. Even I'm not bothering to take time-lapse of the miniatures that I'm printing, because the end result, the printed miniature, is more important to us than the process of the printing itself. A lot of 3D printing channels that are out there, they show you the prints, and they show you a grey printed miniature at the end of it, and they say, well, you know, look, here's what we made. You go, well, that's nice, but, and I could see some of the detail, but that's not the end goal. That's the starting goal for a hobbyist. Well, I can actually show you a mostly painted tank, so that's something there. I love to paint the things I print so you can see what the detail is like on an actual finished, or at least mostly finished, miniature, and it gives you a better idea as the person who is watching just how these things go. Anyway, my overall recommendation. Well, there were those negative aspects, so namely the fact that there was no feet underneath the vat was of huge importance to me. If I take the resin vat out, and it's got resin in it especially, I don't want to be having to find a special surface to put it down. I just need somewhere flat, and the FEP shouldn't be getting contaminated doing so. The second major problem was the fill and empty function. The way the little filler tube enters and exits the vat caused resin to leak down the back of the tube and onto the screen of the printer. Not a great design feature, and it was very hard to get in there and clean it with, you know, like I said, I don't have the world's biggest hands, but they're not small hands either. Getting in there and cleaning it was quite difficult. Third major thing, of course, was the the actual tube coming out the back of the machine, little 6mm silicon hose. That thing needed somewhere to live, and they have put a retention clip into the system. I believe all of my concerns have been passed on at the company up the chain. But are they deal breakers? No, none of them are deal breakers. They were just the issues I had, and in the sake of transparency with you, the audience, I want you to trust my review, so I want to point out the things that went wrong. And those are things that went wrong with this printer. Those are mechanical issues. They are not the result of my slicing, they're not the result of the resin, they're not the result of the firmware. They were the result of the engineering of the product. And you know what? Making things like this is really difficult, so I'll cut them slack in that regard. But those are negatives on this printer. Also, at a time when other manufacturers are bringing things like self-leveling into the market, self-leveling might be something that this printer could use. Maybe it's something they can even bring in later firmware updates, although I kind of doubt it. And by self-leveling here, I'm really referring to the ability of it to sense the amount of pressure that is placing onto the screen of the printer, and not having to change the alignment of leveling screws. Okay, that's the thing I'm referring to. Just to be crystal clear. But overall, the actual rating, would I suggest this to people who are in the 3D printing space? Well, normally I suggest a smaller printer, something like the Halot 1 Plus, which I've previously reviewed, because, well, it was a smaller body, but it had a relatively large build plate for the small body and a 4K screen, so you could produce decent quality miniatures, you produce relatively large miniatures for the size of the machine. Great. This machine is a lot bigger than that. Now, is the price point going to be worth it for the larger machine and the complications that come with having a larger machine? Well, that's going to be up to the individual person to decide. I normally wouldn't suggest something like this for an absolute beginner or novice. But then, thinking about it, I went, well, all of the functions on this are pretty much identical to the Halot 1 Plus. Uses the same leveling system, uses the same touch screen, the same slicing software. You plug in the same sort of USBs, it retains the files in the same manner. So all you've done is take the machine, pay a few $100 extra, and you get something that moves far faster and produces the miniatures very quickly and very nicely. And if you slow the machine right down, then you get phenomenal quality out of it because, well, it isn't a K printer at the end of the day. So, yes, I actually would give this a highly recommended big thumbs up. I think it's a fantastic printer. But it could have been a better printer. If they fixed those little engineering nigglies, that would change things dramatically. And if, I was going to give this an arbitrary figure, right, of 100% is the maximum possible score, this printer would be probably an 85. Okay? You've got those little engineering quirks there, and of course some of the creature comforts that other manufacturers are doing. Would I buy this over the Anycubic offering? Yes. Now, that's kind of a big deal, and I would buy it over the Elegoo offering as well. And I say this as someone who has owned and likes both Elegoo and Anycubic's products. Anycubic selling me a larger screen is not a selling feature. It reminds me of the digital cameras in the early 2000s, where it became a race of pixels. How many megapixels does your screen have? And then every camera company that was making digital cameras was in this race to have more megapixels in the screen. It reminds me of that. 8K 10 inches, that's the cutoff. Anything beyond that point, it's redundant. The amount of extra detail you're going to see out of it with your human eye is just not there. So it is not a selling feature for me. So if I'm paying for that feature in the printer, then I'm paying extra for something that's actually achieving nothing for me as the person using the machine. And Elegoo, they keep insisting on this weird ball joint leveling system that's just awful. Just awful. Just move over to the same system all the other brands use with the screws in the sides and such, and it's far better. And also the filter cartridge on the Elegoo models, USB filter cartridge that plugs in the top. I hate that thing. Just have one like Creality, like this printer does, where the filter cartridge is just a little unit. You can unscrew the unit, pack it full of new material, whether it's charcoal, whether it's foam, whatever it might be, instead of having this little USB device that basically says, oh, I only work when you have me plugged into the printer and I'm a proprietary piece of hardware and yada yada. No, you don't want any of that in your printer. This is a good price, high resolution, prints incredibly fast, and it was very reliable. I've had one failed print, one on this machine, and that was the very first print with not enough support. I've printed 8 Lemon Russes, 20 odd infantry, a Doom of Malentine, several other things on this printer so far. None of them failed. And even the ones that did have issues, like, slightly incorrectly sliced first print I did of a tank. Well, it was down to support, so it was down to software. It's not an issue for me at all. The computer was snappy, it was responsive. They're all pros. So the machine was working as intended. So it's going to get a very, very high recommendation from me. A 10.3 inch, now that I think about it. 8K LCD screen, fantastic. The light source, great. Their Dynax motion system, high speed, moving up and down, low vibration, that was all true. It did what they said on the box. Fast printing speed. Hyperspeed worked fantastic. Great. The CPU and the operating system, yes, you saw how quickly it was able to move files across from the USB onto the system. Small files obviously are pretty much instantaneous. Larger files can take up to a minute or two. The resin pump system. It's called a smart resin pump. I think it is a resin pump. It is not that smart though. Let's be honest. The flipping lid, fantastic. It's nice to not have to pick up a box and lift it off the top of the printer every time. Just having a flip lid. It's a feature all printers should have at this point. I don't know why they don't. And wash and cure stations should have it as well. The smart air purifier worked great. And overall, very happy with it. So, highly recommended from me. And as I said, there are flaws with this device. There are flaws with all of these devices. And if I sat down with the latest offering from Anycubic, or if I sat down with the latest offering from Elegoo, or Form 3D, or whoever it might be, I'm going to pick up those flaws. Because when you've been using these things for several years and you've had many different, like I said, I'm sitting around 15 printers or so. When you've had that many devices, you know what you like and don't like about these machines, and you know exactly what to look for on them. But then you always find something new. Anyway, that's it from me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching this video. There is links in the comments section and in the details or description of the video below. They will take you to Creality's web store if you're curious about this printer and you want to purchase one. And please, in the comments below, any of the points that I've raised in here about things like 12K resolution printers, autofill and empty, high-speed printers, anything like that, please put it into the comments, because the people who are at the company and are going to watch this review, and that will happen, they will watch the review, they're going to want that feedback. Hearing directly from you, the customer, about these particular products and what you do and don't like about them is going to heavily influence the direction they go in when they come up with further printers. And if you do like this review, if you do feel that you got something out of it, please let that be known as well, because again, that is valuable information for them at the company. Anyway, that's it from me, Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.